Good morning. This is Jason Dean at Film Fanatic. Here I am back at it again. I wanted to do back to back series or coverage of these two tremendous movies. I just did one, the first one being Pearl, directed by Ty West. So this is a show about actually the first movie called X. I did a review of this film when I think it was I got to see X in the theater when it came out earlier this year, and I went into it super cold, and it was it's a tremendous film. And I did a review back when I was doing all Facebook uh, reviews. I was doing, it was my first venture into doing live video things for Film Fanatic. I did a show on X, and now that I've made this slow transition to doing YouTube, I'm doing a video for X now, and coming off hot off the heels off last night, I got to see Pearl, which is the prequel for X. And it actually came out. Pearl actually just came out. I think it maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and just came out on DVD, and just an outstanding movie. I love both of these films. I'm a huge fan of Ty West. So this show is going to be about X. That being said, I'm really interested, well, super excited to see what Ty West will do next, and I think that I could easily see the creative team behind this film designing a plan for another film based off of these characters. It could easily be done because I feel like the whole thing around the narrative of both of these films alone is super interesting and innovative, and especially the facet of this whole thing of these two movies, and that they were both released with only there being like a few months apart. And when I saw X in the theater, they had a trailer for Pearl, and it was awesome, and I really loved that movie, and I could not wait to see Pearl. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see it in the theater, but it just came out on DVD, and I just watched it last night. So I just did a show on that, and it's been, since it's something I'm still thinking about. It's fresh in my, in my brain. I wanted to talk about it, so I have to talk about X. Ty West is, like I said in previous, a little bit in the other previous show that I just did for Pearl, and I've talked about Ty West before, as far as being, there's a thing that comes up a lot where, a lot of critics or people kind of have that. I kind of look at it or label it as the grandpa syndrome, where typically when somebody has that mindset, they typically trash, new music. They trash a lot of new films, or they basically. There's one guy in particular. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a very well respected person in the film industry, and he actually has a lot of clout, and he's actually involved in the film industry. But he has a YouTube channel, and I believe he's also a producer on certain films. But he has a YouTube channel. Well, basically the whole kind of thing of his channel is, and a lot of the times I agree with him. A lot of the times I find myself agreeing with him, but he's very cynical. I have a very cynical attitude towards things, misanthropic kind of view of things. And so there's a lot of things that he talks about that I do agree with in a lot of ways, and things that need to probably be discussed, as far as moving the art form of filmmaking into the future. And he's very good, I think, in critiquing where things currently are to a degree. But there's a lot of things about his opinions that really disagree with. And again, you know, who wants to live in a world where everyone has the same opinion? You know, life would be very boring. But the thing that I disagree with him is that he does have a very negative, cynical worldview of filmmaking, especially when it comes to modern filmmaking. And I think he could be a little bit less, I don't know, he comes across as a little bit too much of a Debbie Downer about it. But he basically talks about that there's not a lot of great filmmaking being made. And I understand, like, typically for me and out of my habits, I always go back to films. My favorite period of filmmaking and my favorite, like, kind of decades are from, like, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Particularly, probably 70s and 80s. That's my go-to thing. I always go back to that period, especially with horror and all of the exploitation movies. That's my favorite. That's my jam. But that being said, I check out lots of different things. I love I love tons of new, films that come out. So I had, I've one of the best examples of that. I think is Ty West. I think he's right now. I think he's an extraordinary filmmaker. I think he's one of the most. He's one to really watch. I think he's still really young, even though he's been around for about 15 to 20 years. He's made a whole bunch of movies, and I've been following his career for quite a few years. I have always had my eye open to him. One of the films that the first film that I saw of his that I actually really liked quite a bit, and I remember after I had seen it, I bought it, was House of the Devil. And that movie is probably about 15 years old almost now. It's hard to believe. And that movie very much reminds me of, for that movie, it really has a big influence. At least when I see it, he took a big influence from Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, which is one of the greatest horror movies ever, one of the best Polanski movies, that he ever did, and it was from 1967. But since then, he's made a whole slew of other movies. I've talked about it too before. He came out of Larry Fenderson's school of filmmaking, and Larry Fenderson was a producer who started this company, Glass Eye Pix. Larry Fenderson, in his own right, is a really great director. He also is a producer and an actor. And he made it a big, he made a big push. And one of the main things behind when he started Glass Eye Pix was to, find other younger directors that were working kind of exclusively in the low budget horror world and try to cultivate their careers and their visions and to help finance them and to build their careers. And so Ty West is probably his biggest success. So he's been making films with Larry Fenderson for quite a few years. These two movies were released by A24, which has kind of emerged as one of the biggest and probably overall probably the best company right now. And it's a still a low budget company, but they tend to mostly release all of these really great and interesting horror films that have kind of a real interesting or original face to them, which I really think is super cool. They released one of their two other recent movies that they did, that A24 put out. They did they released Alex Garland's Men, which is great, a really awesome movie. Alex Garland is one of my favorite directors also. And then they also did a film, they released a film called The Green Knight, which I thought was a really great movie. So they tend to, sometimes A24 gets labeled as like an art house kind of, company. And they have a degree of, I can understand that, like a lot of the films that they kind of release, and they're mostly fantasy and definitely horror based films. They tend to have a slower burn, or like they have this European kind of flair to them, where where a lot of the times European films tend to have they're a little bit more a character study, but they tend to be a little bit. They're presented in more of like a slow burn kind of, to a format where there's a lot of build up and there's some exposition. They don't typically rely on, like, say, the Hollywood trope or cliche of like the jump scare thing that a lot of American horror films have in those films. European films tend to have a little bit of a slower pace, and there's that slow burn, and also a development of where things will go. So A24 has that kind of vibe to a lot of their films, and they released both X and Pearl, and I think it's probably safe to say I think they're probably the best and most interesting company right now. And I the thing that I love, even if they're not necessarily a good movie per se, and that's all open to interpretation or whatnot in your own taste, but I think the thing that's so cool about them is they're kind of off the grid, compared to, say, large companies, and they're making money, and they're definitely a force right now, but it's still more or less an independent company. But the thing that's so cool about them as a company and what they're doing is I think, even if the movie, like I said, isn't maybe your cup of tea, they're risk takers. They take chances. They show films and get behind films and finance films and distribute films that are not really, films that you would think would be for, say, middle America, or like your general population out there that goes to see movies. Uh, they tend to have, this interesting and outside of what you would perceive to be a horror film. They don't typically have the same horror, tropes that you would see in a lot of American horror films. So they take chances, and I think it's just that alone. I think is pretty darn commendable. That there's a company like taking chances, knowing that these films might not make any money because they're not very commercial. So I think it's really cool. But Ty West's last two films were released, and so in into itself, I think that's pretty extraordinary. So a quick list, like Pearl, which just came out, X, House of the Devil, like I said, The Innkeepers, which he also wrote and directed, Maxine, The Sacrament, In the Valley of Violence. He's got quite a few movies. He's got about 10 to 15 movies already, and he's still a young guy. He got started at a very young age making these films. He's also done some acting as well. He was in You're Next, which is a pretty cool movie. He's actually an actor and actually plays a filmmaker in that film. He also did one of the shorts for that series VHS, which is actually a really great series. I believe there's like two collections out, and they're basically like found footage horror films, but they're very cool. He did one of those, and I remember seeing that. He did The Roost, The ABCs of Death. So he's been putting out movies since like early 2000 ish. But I really feel X and especially Pearl are by far, at least in my book, his best films ever. When I went to go see X, I have this new thing now. Like the last year or so, I started going to the movies more often, and I really love going to the movies. I haven't been to the movies in a while, but I'm looking forward to going back again soon. But I've been trying to, when I go to the movies now, and especially when I started going back to the movies after not going to the movies for a long time, I been trying to go to movies really cold, like not really reading much about them. There's a couple of YouTube guys that I check out and listen to, and I'll get a general synopsis of, like, if they're generally giving something a thumbs up, but that's about it. And then I don't usually read reviews. I don't do anything with that, and I typically try to go into films really cold, so I don't have any expectations. I'm just going into it with a blank slate, because I think it does affect, if you do go in with certain you know preconceived notions. Obviously, it can affect your experience. At the end of the day, if it does resonate with you, you'll go back to it, But initially, I think it can have that impact. So X was one of those movies. I went into that especially cold. I didn't know anything about it. I knew, I saw, and it was very last minute when I saw it, and I looked up a quick review of it. I was watching one of the guys that I like, that I love a lot on YouTube, and he did it, and I watched like maybe a 2 minute clip of his review. And generally, it was Chris Stuckman, who I really love. I think he's an incredible review guy on YouTube. And he mostly centers, most of his work is horror based, but he mostly centers on a lot of new work. So he initially, from what I saw, had given it a really high praise, and then I saw that Ty West was the director and was also the writer, and I was like, oh, cool, like so. But that was all I knew about it. I didn't know anything else about it, and I went in with a couple of friends. I went with my buddy Emmett, who we did a show last week for Film Fanatic, and we went into it totally cold. And we had a couple other friends that also came, and we were all blown away by it. We were just like, "This is great. This is like a classic modern day slasher film that," and it very much reminded me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It took place in the 70s, like Texas, and it was in Texas, but it was its own original thing. But it was very slow and very atmospheric. It had all of these wonderful, amazing scenes in it where there was nothing really happening, but it just had this atmosphere and this tension that was just incredible. Super cool. And it was definitely a slasher film, without a doubt, 100%. It evolved into that kind of thing. And at the conclusion of the film, they had this trailer for Pearl, which was the prequel. And I just did a show on that, and I just watched that last night, totally blown away. But I came out of that movie just thinking like, wow, like that was really great. And I've seen it once or twice since then, and I think it's definitely one of the best horror films I've seen in definitely this year and probably in the last couple of years. Utterly original, great characters, great atmosphere, great kills, and I love that it had a slow burn kind of pace to it. It was very suspenseful and very atmospheric, and the had this it had this incredible payoff for the ending and the conclusion of the film. It was just great, and it just felt like you were really transported to. You really felt like you were in the 70s in Texas. Like, it was extraordinary. And when I found out, actually fairly recently, that both of these films and X were filmed in New Zealand, I was blown away by it and the story around it. Both of these films were shot in New Zealand during the lockdown. So the filmmakers Ty West and Mia Goth, who is the star, they were basically not allowed to leave the country, and just extraordinary circumstances. And this was the first time I'd ever come across seeing Mia Goth on the big screen, and she's pretty much officially my favorite actress right now, or actor. She's just incredible. She's got so much versatility. She's able to show so many colors as an actress, and she could do anything. I mean, it's unbelievable. And when I found out that she plays two roles, I found out after I'd seen the movie, I was blown away. Like, she plays her own separate character, who kind of more or less becomes the hero of the film to a degree. But she also plays the old woman in the film, who is the serial killer, and is, I think, one of the creepiest characters or killers that I've seen in a slasher film in many, many years. Just amazing. But when I found out that that was Mia Goth also playing that woman, who was Pearl, I was just floored. I had no idea it was her. It was amazing. Like, totally, she has that ability to totally, completely transform herself as an actress. So Pearl is basically the film that came out afterwards, is a prequel, and it follows her journey as to how she became this insane serial killer. Extraordinary movie. And I don't own either of these movies yet on Blu-ray, but I'm very, very excited to do that. and to definitely sit down and watch both films back to back, even though they're completely their own their standalone films, but just tremendous filmmaking. Can't stress it enough. And like I said, I've been following Ty West's career for a long time, and there's certain films of his that I thought were pretty good. Certain films of his I like quite a bit, but these two films are, I without a doubt, the best two things he's ever done. He's a really unique director too, because he's one of those guys that a lot of the content he creates is from his own imagination. He's also heavily involved with the scripts, and just has a completely original vision on how to create film. So I'm tremendously excited to see what he'll do next. But I think with these two movies, and especially X, I think these movies put him in a, even though he's still very much a horror director, and he's definitely still very much an independent horror movie director. These films have like put him legitimately on the map as to be somebody to watch, like a real one of the best directors around. Period. So this is Jason Dean. Happy post Thanksgiving. Stay tuned for some more shows coming your way. If you like this page, please like and subscribe to my page. Feel free to comment. I love hearing feedback. Thank you again. Have a great day. Peace.